Looking back on the week that was and forward to the week ahead. It's the Fantasy Football Hustle. Here are your hosts, Brian Drake and Dwain McFarland.
Hey, what's going on out there all across fantasy land? It is the Fantasy Football Hustle. Welcome in. We're excited to have you here. Brian Drake from FightingChanceFantasy.com, joined by the man whose data is so nice, he gets paid for it twice, Dwain McFarland of Establish the Run and Pro Football Focus. Dwain, what's going on, my friend? How are you? Happy Scott Fishbowl week and everything else that's going on out there.
Yeah, thanks, man. Excited to be doing the show. Yes, Scott Fishbowl. It's awesome because you're, getting to do this, we always love to draft, right? But it's cool to be drafting for such a great cause and everything that Scott does. It also is just another chance, even though it's a wild format where, basically ADP is just kind of out the window in Scott Fishbowl for those folks that don't know what it is. It's a super flex, it's tight end premium. You get minus points for sacks, picks are more costly. So, really the super talented quarterbacks are worth way more, right, than the junk quarterbacks where in normal fantasy, they can kind of merge together and blend, right? Well, not in the Scott Fishbowl. So it keeps everybody on their toes, but I'm having an absolute fun time with that. Just trying to stay cool, Drake. The AC went out on us last night. Yeah, we've been nursing it along for about a year or two. You never just want to go drop like 10 grand on an AC. So you kind of nurse it along. Yep, that happened last night. So Monday, we'll be getting a new air conditioner. So for now, I've kind of got everything rigged where we can at least keep it kind of cool in here and I'm not sweating on the audience.
And you live in Texas. That's Texas heat right there.
Oh, yeah.
Jeez, I know it's hot up where I am too. I'm sure it's hot where everybody is out there. And it's going to be hot and sweaty in your draft rooms about a month from now.
Hopefully
when you're in rounds 3, 4, 5, and you're looking at who's going to be your RB2, and you look at some of these names and you just want to spit your beer out because you're like, oh my God, Leonard, Fournette, Carson, do I want to take any of these guys? Well, that's what today's show is all about. We're going to take you through a lot of these guys who Dwain likes over at his rankings at Pro Football Focus. And these are guys in rounds 3, 4, 5 are going to be available. And
few round sixers.
Maybe a round sixer like Kareem Hunt. We'll get to him later. So everybody seemed to really dig what we did a week ago. If you go to our YouTube page, search Fantasy Football Hustle, not only can you view the full show, but we're going to have each individual guy broken down so you can just click right to James Conner or Mark Ingram or Devin Singletary, whoever we talk about here. Another reason you guys really need to go subscribe to the YouTube page. Things are blowing up over there. Big thanks to our guy 5 Yard Lee from the 5 Yard Rush podcast for helping us out, do all that stuff. And of course, our main man, I'm going to mess up the last name again. Corey's last name, Dwain, hit me with it. Hypus. Okay. Corey Hypus. He is our, what's our title for him this week? Chief Hustle Data Strategist, Assistant to the Regional Manager. He's the guy that makes all these pretty slides with Dwain's data. So we super appreciate Corey there. Follow him on Twitter at Corey. That's COREY_HIETPAS. You'll see him tagged in a lot of our stuff at FF Hustle. A great guy doing the Lord's work here for us at the Fantasy Football Hustle. But let's jump in right now to the first running back we want to talk about, Dwain, and that is Leonard Fournette. He's got an ADP right now of RB14, coming off the board around pick 32. Now, Leonard Fournette's a guy who's been pretty productive. Last year, he averaged 22.7 touches per game. That was only second to CMC. He had 100 targets. 100 targets, folks. That's crazy. 76 receptions. Nobody saw that coming. There's going to have to be some positive touchdown regression. He was RB9 last year. Here's something that I don't like, though, Dwain, is they added a receiving back that Jay Gruden loved when he was in Washington, and that's Chris Thompson. Chris Thompson had 35 targets through the first 5 weeks. Only Eckler and CMC had more through the first 5 weeks. So to me, that's a big red flag that he ain't getting those 100 targets again. But let's dive in right now. Give me your thoughts on Mr. Fournette.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a couple of quick things before we hop in. So one way to think about this show as we walk through this, number one, these are in order of ADP, and then we'll do a final take on each guy. If you're listening on the podcast, I am going to talk a little bit about the graphics that we're showing on YouTube. So make sure you hop over to YouTube, subscribe, and check it out. A lot of, like Brian said, we're doing a lot of hard work on that. But one way to think about this is, are any of these guys potential arbitrage plays to some of the guys that we talked about for round 2 last weekend, right? So we talked about some of the warts of Josh Jacobs, of Nick Chubb, of some of those guys that we love, right? Great running backs, really high efficiency. Any one of them could be Derrick Henry in a given year, because they could hit, they could win a rushing title and score you a lot of touchdowns, but they're gonna struggle a little bit in the passing game. So really now we're getting down to a tier of, there are some guys in this grouping they really have similar roles to Nick Chubb, similar role to Josh Jacobs, even to Joe Mixon, if you listen to the last show. And so you have to start to think about, what could my draft strategy be? If what does this allow me to do if I like some of these guys? And so we're just going to try to really load you up on the information, so that, and we'll give you our thoughts, but you can also make your own call. So Drake, you set up Fournette well. I think the key with Fournette, like you said, we'll talk about Chris Thompson, in a minute. But looking at last year, he had the whole backfield to himself. The biggest issue for Fournette wasn't really around volume. You see he only had two weeks that were in the top 12 runners, which would have given him an RB1 finish. But then he had multiple weeks, right, where he was at least an RB2. He didn't have too many super stinkers. He was at least like an RB3 most weeks. His lowest of the season was this week 14, 9.3 points. He was just on a really, really bad offense. He averaged 17 points per game last year from a fantasy standpoint. The cool thing about him is, and love what Corey did, he saw what we did last week where I inserted some screenshots. So he created this cool visual people can see right away, the percentage of team drop back and the margin of victory. So that's how much the team won or lost by, and then where's the impact to the player. What you'll notice, with Fournette is he's more stable than actually some of the backs that we looked at. Now that's going to change this year with Chris Thompson, but it was because he still had that receiving down work. It was helping keep him viable in some weeks where they're losing, by 7 points and having to drop back a lot, and he can still jump up here into this RB2 range. And that was because of his receiving ability. Okay. You'll notice down here in these games, the Jags are absolutely getting their wheels blown off. Right. Wow. And if you look at Fournette, Fournette, was really more of a check down option. He's not a running back that's going to be running like angle routes, wheel routes, bullet routes, things working up into the second layer of the field against linebackers and safeties. That's what Chris Thompson's going to bring. And like you said, Thompson is a very viable receiving threat along the lines of an Austin Eckler and CMC, Alvin Kamara, those guys. So it's just a guy that's never been able to stay healthy, but definitely a mismatch kind of player. And so some of this that we saw with Fournette last year, we're going to see go away. Again, all of his snaps were great last year. Everything was above. What I expect to see this year is whenever you see these high percentages of having to drop back to pass, you see some of these really big losses, or this one was a win by 13, but some of these games where they're getting blown out like here, I think you're going to see Fournette drop down into this RB2, RB3 range, more like what we saw in some of the information we shared last week around Josh Jacobs. We shared the information last week, similar around Joe Mixon, some of those guys. So here are the rushing attempts, and this is really what saved Fournette last year. Look at all these weeks where he's up above RB1, even one of them whenever they're losing by 22 points. Almost every week, right, from a rushing attempt standpoint, is at least an RB2. He only has 2 weeks where he's below that. I think he'll have a chance this year, Drake, to keep his rushes in this RB2 range most weeks. I think we're going to see less of these spikes up into the RB1 range, though, because of what we're going to see with Chris Thompson in some of these weeks where you definitely won't get this kind of thing very often, where you've got a blowout situation going on and you still see him getting this kind of workload. But you see his percentage of the attempts lined up down here across the bottom, 81, 71, 75, 76. I still think he'll get that same percentage of attempts. I don't think Chris Thompson is much of a threat in the running category, but where Chris Thompson is going to be a threat is to the snaps, which will then turn into a few more passes, right? If that makes sense. So if we look at, the last year the routes ran, and we noticed Corey did some good work on this. We had some he and I got together this week and took some feedback from the audience. And so we changed these last two slides, that this one and the one before, from being percentages, and we put the percentages at the bottom for you guys. And we actually are using more raw totals. So you actually see the number of routes ran versus a running back one averages 22 routes ran per game. Fournette was above that every year. That's what's going to change, to your point, Drake. So really around final take, on Fournette, I think, the overall problems are you've got a team offense that could be really crappy. You got Chris Thompson coming in, who's going to steal passing work. And then you have what I just would call the Fournette factor. I mean, the guy can just be a bonehead, right? He's cost me so much money in DFS before. I don't know if you guys remember, but it was 2 years ago. He was absolutely blowing up for RB1 of the whole day. I had Fournette in a bunch of lineups. I just loved the matchup. Everybody was off of him. I think he was like 2% owned. And that was the game where he pulled his helmet off and swung it at another player. I
remember texting you during that.
Yeah, because you had seen how I was doing. I sent you a screenshot. Like I was winning. I don't know. It was like 10 grand or something at the time. And you're like, holy crap. You're like, Fournette just needs to just hold steady. And then he did that. And you sent me, I remember you texted me and be like, oh shit. Yeah, exactly. Now the thing that helps, right, is Jay Gruden, is going to bring more balance to the offense. A lot of people think that Jay Gruden's like, going to drop back past 70% of the time. Actually, he's usually about a 55-45 guy. The problem is when you're going to be trailing the Jaguars, defense went from being one of the best in the league to just being atrocious. And so they're not going to be able to stop other teams. So I see this team being a 57-58% pass team. That's going to get Thompson on the field more. But the positive for Fournette is he could offset all of that, Drake, if he just scored a few more touchdowns, right? So his touchdown regression is actually regressing back positively, right? Or you hear some people say aggression to the mean. But to take him at his ADP of a 32, right? So you're talking about a guy that you're taking in early round 3. I've seen him go late round 3. I've seen him slip into the 4th. I'm much more willing to take a guy like Fournette when he slips into the 4th, because really what you're betting on is his touchdown regression has to hit for you. Because those, I think 100 targets that he had last year, I don't know, you probably have it right in front of you, Drake. I've been looking at percentages all morning. But if you look at that, that's going to come way down. There's no way that, Fournette is going to be at those numbers. So if you look at where I've got, Fournette, for the season, right now, I've got him projected at, let's see here, Drake. I've got him at, in a half-point PPR, 202 points, which is what we're looking at here as far as ADP goes. And I've got him at 56 targets and 42 receptions. Okay, so that's a big dip, from where he was last year. Now his touchdowns, I gave him 7 on the season versus the 3 that he had last year. I am anticipating that that's going to regress back to the mean. The biggest issue he had was he just didn't have many attempts from inside the 5-yard line. This offense was just never, ever down in that territory. The other good thing for him, he's a strong yards after contact runner. So even if his offensive line isn't very good, he always has a chance to be around that 4 yards per carry, just because he can work his way, through contact. But I'm totally with you. So where I hit on this is I'm willing to take Leonard Fournette more when he slides, but I don't get excited about it because I don't like betting on things like touchdowns coming back, because they're so unpredictable. Just because you flipped the coin and it said heads one next year doesn't necessarily mean that you have a higher percentage, right, of hitting, tails on the next coin flip, right? Each time is literally an equal percentage that you're going to hit, a heads or a tails. And that's the same kind of thing that works here. We could end up, with a flipping the coin, we get a tails again. And if Fournette scores 4 or 5 touchdowns, you're really not going to like having him. You really don't want him as your RB1 in any case, like if you're trying to go contrarian. But as your RB2, I think we're going to talk about some backs that are a little cheaper that you would rather have.
And if you want Dwain's rankings, which so many of you always ask for, you can head over to Pro Football Focus, and they are available for you. Right now, Leonard Fournette is Dwain's RB18 in his initial rankings. So let's now flip over to Chris Carson. I think he's a guy who gets forgotten about when we start talking about running backs and what they can provide for you in terms of value in your draft. Last year, he was running back 11 in a half-point PPR. All right, he's going off the board now at running back 16. You can get him at the end of the 3rd round. He avoided hip surgery in the offseason. Yes, they brought in Carlos Hyde, but they've admitted he's going to be a backup. Penny blew out his ACL in December, so he's going to have a while to be sitting on the shelf. Here's the bottom line with Chris Carson. They're going to pound the rock. This guy's going to give you 1,000 yards and 7+ touchdowns. That's what he does. He's not a zero in the passing game. And you see as the chart here, average 16 points per game. And he was only an RB1 3 of 15 games played. Is that great? No, it's not. But 40% of the time he's an RB2. That's what you're drafting him for.
You 60% of the time. Yeah, 60% of the time you get better. You get RB2 or better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's a solid guy.
Yeah.
I just landed him in the Scott Fish Bowl, I think as my RB3 or 4. Like people just forget about this guy. I couldn't believe it. So Chris Carson, fantastic opportunity in Seattle. The team is going to be good. You know he's going to be on the field, and they're just going to put the ball in his belly and let him rock and roll.
Yeah, so for Carson, I mean, you nailed it. I mean, you can see the 3 games where he topped the 25, point mark. He's never one of these guys, Drake, that is going to explode for 40. It just doesn't really happen. Seattle will mix some other guys in, but the good news is, like you said, they're so run heavy. If you look at what, the Seahawks do, I mean, he's in a great situation. I mean, they'll try to run the ball as much as they can. If they can run the ball 50% of snaps, they will. Last year, I believe they were 52-48 from a pass run split, which is very, that's from a league average standpoint. Typically, you're around 56-44, 57-43 is typically the league average from an attempt perspective and the way the splits go down. So he's on a team that's one of the much more run heavy teams in the league. And so that works out for him. And if you look at him, I mean, it's like you said, you see this consistency that he gets. The other thing that I like here is, you notice even in these, you'll notice a lot of these games, look how many games they keep it close where they don't have to drop back a lot. That's just how they manage these games in Seattle. And they always keep it this way. You just don't see a bunch of these spikes where, they do have a few times where they get blown out, right? And in those games, those are where you're seeing him drop down here below this. And it isn't really because his role is changing. He's staying on the field. They just don't pass a ton to the running backs, right? And they just had to run less in those games. But any game where they're keeping it close or it's within range, which they do quite often, he ends up being a great play for you. So their defense is going to take a little bit of a hit this year, so that hurts him some. But if we look at all of his from a percentage of snaps played, he's always in this solid territory. Again, you see where they had to drop back and pass 71% of the time. The snaps drop down here. You see these two over here. These actually they use 3 backs in these weeks. Weeks 12 and 13. Yeah. And week 11, he actually, I don't remember if that one is actually the bye week or the week he missed, but he did have a week that he missed. So, but again, for the most part, his snaps are solid. If we think about this, they added Carlos Hyde, right? I'm not really worried about Carlos Hyde. I think that's more around Rashad Penny. When you've listened, like you said, all the reports on his hip are positive that he'll be ready to go for week 1. So I'm proceeding as if, that's going to be the case. If we look at his rushing attempts, again, look at this. Every single week, Drake, except for 2, he at least hit an RB2 threshold for his rushing attempts. And that's due to the way that the Seahawks want to play the game. Even if the Seahawks, all of a sudden, their defense is really bad this year, like at the most, I think you're going to see, Drake, like would they go to a 55 pass, 45 run, right? I think that's the furthest you'll see them. You'll never see them just turn into like a 62% pass like you will see some teams, right? 38 run when they're getting blown out. Because they believe that their game is built off of big plays, and they believe to have those big plays, they have to have the rushing game intact. Now, it's debatable how many times you need to run the ball a game to make the defense respect play action and those things. Probably not as much as the Seahawks think, but regardless, that's the way they play the game. And so if we look at, the percentage of rushing attempts in the games where he was healthy last year, Drake, he averaged 63% on the year, on the season. He was a little bit lower than that. But when you take out those games where he, left the game early or he was dinged during the game. So when he was healthy, 63% of the attempts. If you look at, what he gets inside, the 5, last year it was 45%, but again, he had some games missed. The year before he was at 76% of the carries inside the 5. I expect this to be one of those players that's going to get 60% plus of the carries, and he's going to get over 60% of the attempts inside the 5. This is one of those teams that they don't necessarily use Russell Wilson a ton inside the 5 like some of the other teams with mobile quarterbacks do, and it was actually even less last year. I think Russell Wilson, his numbers as far as being used in those high leverage situations has actually gone down, over the last few years. So that's a good thing for Chris Carson. So I think Chris Carson, when I look at Chris Carson right now, I'm pretty excited about him. Even his routes ran, yeah, he has these dips, but like you said, he's not a zero. He's not a zero. Early in the year, they were passing a little bit more to the running backs. Again, now we've got these raw numbers down here instead of percentages. But you can see he's getting to that RB2 number enough when you factor in the attempts that we just talked about, right? Now, the thing you'll notice is they're getting blown out, and he's not the guy getting these, routes. What they're trying to do is go further downfield, right? And he's having to stay in to block. It's not necessarily that he's leaving, the field all the time. He did lose some snaps during that game, but he's just not a huge part of the passing game. But I think you nailed it earlier when you said he's not a zero. And so when I look at, Chris Carson, I don't see a lot of negatives. I don't even think Carlos Hyde signing is really a negative. You got Rashad Penny, with a blown out ACL, who's probably not going to be ready for week 1. Carlos Hyde is actually recovering himself. So when I look at Chris Carson, this is a guy I don't mind targeting, Drake, and I've seen him fall past this round. So if I take a runner in the first round and I want to take a stud receiver or stud tight end in the second round, and I want to make sure I have 2 runners after that going into round 3, Chris Carson is one of the few runners in that 3rd round to 4th round, and I love him in the 4th round. You got him, in the 6th round or 5th round of Scott Fishbowl? Yeah. I think that's an absolute steal at that point. But he's on target for his return. He's on a run-heavy team. There aren't any passing down specialists Carlos Hyde isn't a passing down specialist. CJ Procise probably won't make the team. Rashad Penny is decent in the passing game, but he's not a specialist, and he's hurt. So I just see Carson as one of the guys that I'm with you. I think he's being undervalued right now. I think where he's being taken right now, 35 overall, is probably about the right spot just due to how many good, we've got some really good receivers going in the 3rd round. But overall, Carson's one guy, Drake, where I wouldn't mind if I just wanted to do something contrarian and I want to build let's say I get down to pick 10 and I don't want to take Joe Mixon or Josh Jacobs or Nick Chubb or one of those guys and say Kenyon Drake, a guy we talked about who we like, is gone. I might take Devontae Adams if he's there, turn around, take Travis Kelce in the 2nd round, come back, take Carson in the 3rd round. I'm going to have a unique team, especially if I'm playing in a big tournament style, season long, like FFPC or NFFC, something like that. I think that's a viable, situation. Yeah, he has been dinged. He's missed a couple of games here and there. So you're going to have to watch for that. But I don't see a clear threat to take his job away. And I don't see a clear threat for the offense just to totally change. So I think he's a good guy to potentially build a different type of roster with in those situations.
Dwain over at Pro Football Focus has Chris Carson as running back 17. Something you also want to think about, a lot of these guys we're going to talk about today, and Fournette and Carson fit into this, are guys who are on the final year of their contract. They're playing for money for next year. That's always an incentive for these guys. And it also could mean these teams are going to just run the wheels off them. So it's not necessarily like, oh, we're going to try to save Chris Carson. He could be gone after this year. They don't care. They could pound him for a bazillion carries. It doesn't really matter. So just be mindful of that as we go along, and I'll try to pinpoint some of the guys who are on the final year of their deal. One guy who's on a deal, but the team seems to hate him, at least the head coach does, is Le'Veon Bell. Coming off the board at RB18. This is a guy, one of a few we're going to talk about, who used to be the RB1. He was the first pick in fantasy for a few years. Now he's almost the 40th pick off the board. Just not an efficient guy for the New York Jets. He was RB17 last year in a half-point PPR, only averaged 3.2 yards a carry. This team went out, they added Frank Gore. Frank Gore for the last 2 decades or so has averaged over 100 carries a season. They added LaMichael Pirine in the draft. Not great for a team. Again, Adam Gase doesn't really like Bell, might find ways to use these other guys. Still caught 66 balls. I'm into that. So can he be better? He could get cut after this season. $4 million in dead money. Would it surprise anybody if they got rid of him? Not at all. So could they just say, we're going to just ride the wheels off of him? Absolutely. So Le'Veon Bell, I think in your home league, more of a name than actual talent we're seeing on the field in this offense, Dwain. Is it fair to say that?
Yeah, I think, when I look at Bell, he's an interesting one, right? I mean, if I think about, what he's going to get, from a volume perspective, I feel pretty good about it. Even with Frank Gore, in the mix, it's like you said, his efficiency was terrible. And that's what you have to be worried about. If you look at, where we're at right now, he never topped the RB1 range, and it wasn't because he wasn't getting enough work. Notice, look at some of those, unlike some runners, notice like week 9 where they're dropping back to pass a lot. I mean, he actually has games where, he's getting some good points even when they're dropping back because he is part of the passing game. The problem is the Jets were just terrible, Drake. It's the 31st ranked offense. He played behind one of the worst offensive lines in the league. His personal yards after contact and tackles avoided per attempt remain pretty good. 2.7 yards per attempt after contact. Anything over 2.5 is pretty good. 17% tackles avoided per attempt per Pro Football Focus. The problem is his breakaways dropped Drake to he didn't break a carry over 10 yards more than 0.8% of the time. Only 2 all season. So he just never had a chance to get going. His yards before contact, so meaning basically what the offensive line blocked, was 0.6, one of the worst in the league. Again, per Pro Football Focus, looking at what that offensive line was able to do. So if you think about Bell's style, right, what does he like to do? He's very patient. He wants to sit behind the line. He wants to pick his spot. He likes to bait the linebacker to the wrong hole, and then he makes his move. He's not a blazer, but he's quick, and he's a fast processor of information. And if you look at that, in the previous years, he had spent, an average of 3.1 seconds and 3.11 seconds behind the line of scrimmage. Last year, it dropped to 2.86 because he just couldn't do that behind the Jets line.
Amazing stat.
Yeah. So now the Jets did spend, some capital, and they did some things with the offensive line. So there's a chance that Bell gets a little bit, of a rebirth here in this year. And if you pair that, with how much work he's getting, I think those are the positive, right? The other thing, Drake, the Jets had 8 rushing attempts inside the 5 last year.
Oh my gosh.
Now Bell had 6 of them. So from a percentage standpoint, if we project the Jets offense being any better, it's still going to be pretty good for Bell. I do think that's where Frank Gore could come in and steal a few things, Drake. So you got to worry that could be there. But even then, I think you're going to see, I think Bell's going to get 60 to 65% of the attempts, 60 to 65% of the work inside the 5. And there's not a real threat to him. I think he still remains the passing down back. It's just, this is all about, do you believe in the Jets offense? Can the Jets offense get any better? Yeah, no. It's a great point. I think it's a well placed answer, right? So think about this: the Steelers averaged with Bell 17 rushing attempts inside the 5. Every year Bell was seeing that. Every year the team was seeing that. Last year the Jets didn't even have half that, right? So that's the problem. And like you said, Adam Gase doesn't really like him. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on these next couple slides because folks basically, they know with Bell. There were a couple games here where they used a few different guys where he and I think Gase were butting heads, and then he missed a game week 14.
Play. It was just the
But
whole.
overall, yeah, snaps are fine. I don't expect that to be an issue, right? This is where he could lose a little bit. He was up over the threshold for RB1 in attempts 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times, right? And he was at least RB2 level every other week. Again, utilization is key. His efficiency was bad, but his utilization was really good. And I don't see him being any worse this year. And again, remember, his personal efficiency wasn't bad. The team efficiency was really bad. From a routes ran per drop back, they replaced him a little bit, like we talked about in those weeks, giving him a little bit of a breather. But, if you look at these percentages, it dropped down to even at the 50% range. That's still pretty solid, and if you look at his average target straight, this is the first guy we've seen today where he's typically up here in this RB2, RB1 range almost every single week. He's hitting that 4 or 5 threshold. And early in the season, they were feeding this guy 10, 9, 8. And he did wear down as the season went on. And when you're the guy in the crosshairs all the time and you've got some mileage on the tires, I think he ran out of gas down the stretch last year. So I think great utilization scores, right? He's the best we've seen so far, stays on the field the most. Gore will hurt that a little bit. His personal running back metrics were not bad. He's avoiding tackles, yards after contact. Those are things he can control in the yards per carry, and how yards per carry is created. What he can't control is, will his offensive line block better? What he can't control is, will Adam Gase stop being a complete, as my 15-year-old has reintroduced the word doofus to me, right? I guess that's big with the kids again, but he would call Adam Gase a doofus. Adam Gase is just a wet blanket when you talk about, offensive pace, when you talk about, anything to do with offensive, creativity. We'll have to do a show just on that one day, Drake. But like all the things you look at, he's just not unique in any way. He doesn't go against the grain of play calling tendencies very well. What he does is tries to manage games. And he has some nice things that he does, but for your skill position players, he's got issues. The other thing with Le'Veon Bell, I don't know if you have it in front of you, Drake. I don't even remember how old he is, but he's getting close to 30. He's got high mileage. He's got a lot of years with a lot of attempts. He's definitely had some nicks and bruises here and there. I would say his price is fair is my final take, Drake, but it's just hard to get excited about the offense. I do think within his range of outcomes, he has a chance to surprise because I think he personally has enough left in the tank to do a little something that the offense was better. And I'll draft him in a pinch, but I'm just not building a draft strategy around Le'Veon Bell.
Yeah.
There's some other guys I feel better about that are a little cheaper than Le'Veon Bell or right in this same price range that I just think have a little more juice on some better offenses.
He's 28 years old.
It feels like he's 30 already.
Yeah, I haven't drafted Le'Veon Bell once. Not in best ball, not in fishbowl, not in any crazy draft I've done. I have no interest in him because I think the play caller is unimaginative and the team is going to stink. I don't know. I'd rather find other guys in that spot, where he's going to go off the board at, pick 40. There's so many good wide receivers right there that I'd much rather take. So I'm not really going to spend much time thinking about drafting Le'Veon Bell.
Yeah, I will say it's hard to find a guy though that's probably locked in for 65% of the rushing work and about 70% of the passing work as a back, this late. And that's the positive you're taking, but you need the team to improve.
Yeah, for sure. So this is the Fantasy Football Hustle. I am on Twitter at Drake Fantasy. He's at Dwain McFarland. You can follow the show at FF Hustle. We are on Instagram also at FF Hustle. Check us out there. We'll be posting all sorts of bikini photos of Dwain and I at the beach because that's what Instagram is, right? So the next running back we're going to talk about is Todd Gurley, another guy who used to be the king of fantasy football. Just came over, signed a 1-year deal with the Atlanta Falcons. He's going off the board as running back 19. Last year, despite everyone just totally crapping on him, he was RB 14 in a half-point PPR. So the Falcons give him $5.5 million to come over. He's only been in the league. This is going to be his 6th year. Everyone thinks of Todd Gurley like he's some 60-year-old man, but I mean, he's not.
His knee is the knee of a 60-year-old man, though.
True. But here's the bottom line with Todd Gurley. Todd Gurley scores touchdowns. And maybe this won't equate in Atlanta.
Le'Veon Bell used to score touchdowns.
Yeah, the last 3 years, this guy scored 14, 21, and 19 touchdowns. Freeman did not do that last year in Atlanta. He only scored 6. So what I want to ask Dwain is, how many attempts can we expect out of this guy? Because last year, Devonta Freeman in his limited work, I think he had in 14 games 184 carries. So I want to see a guy in Gurley who's going to get more work, be the man in the passing game. And I think if Todd Gurley's healthy, it's crazy to say this, but he's a league-winning kind of guy because he's going to be on a team whose defense is atrocious. He's going to be hopefully out there catching passes. Who else are they going to give the ball to inside the 5? If he falls into the end zone for 15 touchdowns like he seems to always do, some guy in your league is going to draft Todd Gurley in the 4th round, and you're going to be like, oh my God, this guy's doing it again.
Yeah. Yeah. And so you name the reasons that I've actually in my rankings got Todd Gurley above Le'Veon Bell. It's really, it's about this offense. I like this offense better. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, if we look at Todd Gurley, last year, it's total different offense, but so we've actually put up Devonta Freeman, so the last slide before this was actually Todd Gurley's information, which Drake shared with you, but Devonta Freeman, and that was a good segue, Drake. You talked about what did Freeman do? So Freeman did deal with some injuries, but this is his data. Okay, this is not Todd Gurley. So just to be clear to everybody, but on the season he averaged 14 points per game from a fantasy perspective. If you want to look at the number of games he had at an RB1, he had 2, and then he had 4 games in that RB2 range, and then he had a bunch of crappy games. Now the wheels just fell off for the Falcons last year. What I would say, for the Falcons, Drake, is they have a lot more upside as an offense than what the Jets do. You got Julio Jones. You've got Calvin Ridley. You bring in Hayden Hurst to help replace Austin Hooper. You did draft you spent, it was either 2 first rounds or a first and a second round pick last year on offensive linemen.
Yep.
So, I mean, this is a team that is willing, right, to invest in the offensive line and try to actually make, the offensive line better. So, I mean, now you've got Clay Matthews, you've got McGarry, you've got Lindstrom. Those are all young guys. Alex Mack is your center. So, I mean, there's potential. This offensive line, I have it graded as a D right now, but there's a potential for it to be a C or a B. Right. And so I think that's the positive thing that you've got for a guy like Todd Gurley. As far as the attempts, you talked about, I think Gurley probably, I've got him right now at 250 before injury. So if you want to factor Gurley in at a full season, I've got him at 256. Once I take away 2 games for concerns around the knee, it puts him right back down around that 225 range. Okay. So now the upside's there for him to play all 16 games. But if we look at Freeman, last year, he was kind of all over the place. It's tough to really take a lot, from this, even looking at the team dropbacks. You look at, the margin of victory in some of these games. You see where he was actually, they're dropping back all the time and he's on the field all the time. And then there's other games where they're not and he's off the field. So there's different things that are going on, in this particular data set. So it doesn't make it super telling as far as what we can expect from Todd Gurley. I think Gurley, to your point, when he's healthy and as long as they're not having to manage his knee all season, like you said, this is a 1-year deal essentially, and they can run him into the ground, if they want to. And if they choose to do that, they don't really have any ties to Todd Gurley after this year. And if they're winning, they could just ride him, and say, look, Todd, this is your last year in the NFL. Your knee's going to be gone. I guess the player could have something to say about that. But, most players tend to think that they're healthier than they are, right? And they want to stay on the field and they want to keep proving themselves. So I think it's tough to bet on any kind of narrative, like that. If we look at, the rushing attempts, for Freeman, it's pretty surprising. Look how many times he gets up here into the RB2 or RB1 range quite often.
Freeman he was a fantasy stud at one point in his career.
Yeah, absolutely. And so,
overall number 1 running back one year.
Yeah, so Freeman had stretches last year, Drake, and he was a guy that we talked about a lot last preseason as a guy that you could, potentially build when we were doing these kind of shows. If he could stay healthy, again, that's the key. Like we're talking about with Gurley here, there was some real potential there. Once you got to week 4, Freeman, here are his PPR, full PPR points, 18, 27, 5, 18. He had some stretches, and then he would hit these injuries, right? And he missed week 11, missed week 12, came back and he gets 10, 19, 8, 34. So, I think you're going to get a little bit more consistency than that out of Todd Gurley. I think you're going to get a little bit more from a passing in the passing work. I don't expect, it wasn't bad for Freeman. Look, a lot of weeks again, and routes ran in the routes ran department from a raw numbers perspective, he's well up there, and a routes ran per drop back, he was right in the range of where you need to be as well for an RB2 or an RB1. So for me with Freeman, I thought if Gurley gets similar utilization or a little bit better, Drake, I think to your point, he's better down inside the 5-yard line. You got an offensive line that can improve. You've got better offensive weapons. I just like the potential with the Falcons offense. Yeah. The Falcons offense it was crazy how bad it was last year and what happened to them. So I expect things to be better. Obviously the issues are you've got an arthritic knee. You never want your running back that you're talking about in fantasy. You're like, oh yeah, I got this guy with arthritis. It's just not a good thing. His utilization isn't a lock. I just don't see another guy on the roster to challenge, but I didn't see anybody on the roster to challenge Freeman either. So I think we'll have to see, are they going to actually try to balance things out and take it a little easy on Gurley and try to have him for 16 games, or are they willing just to wear him out? I do think his price is fair for where I've got him graded on utilization. I do prefer Chris Carson for some of the things we talked about earlier. I just, I feel better about, his legs. I feel better about the commitment to him as the runner. And I think they're probably similar in talent levels at this point, in their careers, Drake. But I just know that Seattle's going to run the ball a lot. And so with Atlanta, some of that could go away. He could pick up some of that, from a standpoint of, being a receiving back. But I like him as my backup option, honestly, to Chris Carson, if I do something contrarian. Like if I start off runner tight end or receiver tight end, and let's say I miss Carson, that's where I might be willing to pull, the trigger on Todd Gurley. Again, it depends on what's there, at receiver. But if Todd Gurley plays the full season, he's got a shot at, 250 carries, and 40, 50 catches, so you're looking at a potential 300 touches if the guy can stay out there on the field in an offense that could be much better than what it was last year.
It's going to be interesting to see with really no preseason, not like he's a guy that plays in the preseason anyways, but what kind of hype there is. I think his ADP is going to move when we get into August. People are going to start saying like, oh, the hype will come. Gurley's healthy. They're going to feed him, blah, blah, blah. And then you could see him go up. I mean, if I can get him late 4, early 5, oh my gosh, I'll gladly take him. Imagine if you could get him as your running back 3 in the 5th round, something like that. That now you're really talking here. So let's go from one running back who was killing it to a guy who 2 years ago was also a superstar, but injuries have kind of knocked him down, and that's James Conner. It seems like we just keep talking about running backs I get in the Scott Fishbowl, but James Conner's on my team also. Now, last year, kind of ravaged by injuries. You'll see that didn't even eclipse 500 yards, only 4 touchdowns, but he did average 15 points a game in a PPR. James Conner, again, like most of these guys we've talked about, last year of his deal. They might run the wheels off him. So you're getting him right now at RB20. He's in the final year of his deal, like we said. In 2018, 2 years ago, in 13 games, nearly 1,000 yards, 12 touchdowns on the ground, caught 55 balls for almost 500 yards. That's the guy you're hoping you get at pick 46 in the 4th round, according to his ADP. If you get that in the 4th round, you're going to the playoffs, or if you don't totally screw up the rest of your draft. He's a guy I like. Everything about Pittsburgh, in my opinion, is pointing up. I'd like to hear your thoughts, Dwain, on their offensive line. But you get Ben back. You've got these great wide receivers out there. The defense is lights out, so they should be winning a lot of games. And, it's set up for Conner. Just stay healthy.
Yeah. And this is a guy that missed week 9, 10, 12 through 14. Week 17, he had shoulder injury. The shoulder is what kept him out early in the season. He's a very physical running back. He likes to run with a physical style. He's got a low center of gravity. He likes to try to get lower than the next guy, and he doesn't quite always get low enough. It takes a lot of hits on the shoulder, and it's been an issue for him.
That's why he's grown himself up now to look like The Rock on every steroid imaginable.
Yeah, he averaged 63% of the team attempts in weeks, in the games 1 through 8. He had 5 rushing attempts inside the 5 over those games, so he took 83%. That 5 is not a great number, but remember, we just talked about Le'Veon Bell, right? He had a team that had 8 in the whole season. So Pittsburgh, even with Mason Rudolph and a guy named Duck, had 5 in the first 8 weeks. And it's a much better offensive line than really any of the situations that we've talked about so far. Atlanta's got some potential there. Seattle doesn't seem to be much of an issue. They seem to have success running the ball no matter how good their offensive linemen or bad they are. But this is actually an offensive line, that can be really good. He averaged 16% of targets, Drake, in the 4 games that Jalen Samuel, missed, in 4 games with Jalen Samuel. But he lost about 40%. Sorry, I'm going to jump down. I'm not going with my slides here. Actually, before I go, notice, here's what I like, Drake. If this offense can be better, you get Ben Roethlisberger back. Look at these games that they won. Look at these points for Conner. 24, 31, 27. Okay. Now, Jalen Samuels did miss week 6 and week 8. So it's worth noting 2 of his biggest performances of the year did come with Jalen Samuel out of the lineup. So if we go down to his routes his snaps are all over, and it's more because of injury. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. And same thing here, injuries and a team that sucks, that was getting blown out because you lose Ben Roethlisberger right out of the gate after week 1. So there's not really a lot we can take from this that's actionable. Really, the percentages are going to be what matters more. And we've already talked about that. 63% in the games where he was healthy. This is what's more of an issue, right? So if we look in these games, his routes getting up over an RB1. Previously, in the year before, Conner was in 2018. Conner was above that line quite often in the games where he was healthy. Last year, he was down below the line a lot, and so Jalen Samuels actually was taking about 40% of the routes per drop back from what Conner was used to getting the year before. So he averaged 14 points per game in the first 5 games of the season with Jalen Samuel. And then he popped for that 31 and 24 points and 6 and 8 without Samuel. So PPR full season with Jalen Samuel projects out to 232 games. Now that's only based on 6 games that they played together last year. And that's with a super crappy quarterback. So again, that's why you start to get, excited. His tackles avoided per attempt dropped from 17% to 12%, but he was playing hurt a lot of last season. His breakaway attempts, though, so at least a 10-yard rush, on a per carry basis, 5%, which is really strong. He's still above the league average. He was 7.4% when healthy in 2018. And again, so all of this without Roethlisberger. So to me, when I think about, Connor, I get kind of excited because what he's able to do, even in a bad offense in these weeks where the Steelers were able to just stay competitive. So you notice the big bowl, right? Roethlisberger returns. You get Ben back. And yeah, Ben's probably good to miss 2 games. So you're going to have to deal with that. But in the games where you have Ben, you have to know that this is a team that went 8-8 with those other 2 quarterbacks. They have a really good defense as well. James Conner is going to get an opportunity. Yeah, the negatives are Conner misses games. He does. I mean, it's a fact. He's going to miss games. He's missed 4, 3, and 6 games in his first 3 seasons. But what I like is they're not the kind of things, Drake, like these pulls and strains. It's more like these bruised. It's like these the shoulder injury, right? It's not like a torn ACL or anything like that. It's things that almost to some extent feels like unlucky. Right, it's harder to predict some of that kind of stuff, but he does try to play through it, and that's the positive thing, about the guy. I mean, he tries not to let it keep him off the field. But I think this is priced. I think this is all priced in. Samuel's usage and his injury history is priced in at RB20. If you can get James Conner in round 4 or round 5, I like him even better than Chris Carson at the price. Because I'm getting him almost a full round to a full round and a half less based on what we're seeing with ADP. Now, in some draft formats like FFPC, they go much closer together. But what I like is this, of all the offenses we've talked about, like Connor is the one where we talked about, the carries inside the 5 that Le'Veon Bell's, the teams he was on used to see, average 17 per season. If the Steelers get 15, rushing attempts inside the 5, this season, which is very, very possible, James Conner is going to get 60 to 70, 80% of those, and he's really good down there. So, I mean, he could easily be a 10-touchdown guy. He's going to not have as much receiving work as folks were used to in 2018. That's probably gone with Jalen Samuel. They did draft Anthony McFarland Jr., so they could sprinkle another back in there, a little bit, and that's something that we'll have to watch in the preseason. But for me, if I'm trying to build a contrarian team, man, I love James Conner. If I can start off, like get my runner in the first round, come back and go ahead and grab a tight end and a receiver in the 3rd round, and then I get James Conner in the 4th as my RB2. I don't want him as my RB1, Drake. That's getting a little risky, I think, because of the injury history. But as my RB2 and a modified running back approach, and we'll talk more about the draft plan as we go, but I think it's a really viable strategy this year to take one of the 2 elite tight ends in round 2 of Kittle or Kelsey. It's going to give you a positional advantage, and just the way the rest of these players are falling down draft boards at these different positions, I think Connor makes a great contrarian play. He and Chris Carson both do, to open up flexibility to build some different types of rosters than what everyone is going to be trying to build this season. If you're going to draft one fantasy team this season, this may not be the strategy. But if you're going to be drafting 50, you're going to be drafting 25 like me, and you're going to be playing, in some higher stakes stuff, trying to win, some of these bigger tournaments. This is going to definitely be a strategy for me.
And if you go over to Pro Football Focus, you can see Dwain rankings right there. And he's got James Conner coming in at RB14, just behind Aaron Jones and ahead of Clyde Edwards-Helaire of the Chiefs. So pretty cool stuff. Head over to PFF and subscribe, help Dwain out. And there's just so much good content, man. I was getting lost in there today before the show. Great stuff from Ian Hartitz and all the guys over there.
Oh, there's some, the PFF has upped their game around fantasy content. There have been some really good folks there in the past, but now the volume, the number of people, that are there, you've got, myself, you've got Ian, you've got Jesse Reeves, you got Nathan Janke, you got Kevin Cole, again, writing stuff around fantasy, which is great to see. I mean, a great mathematical mind, and then there's other guys that I haven't even mentioned. So, I mean, there's some really good content going up. Eric Eager has done a lot of work behind the scenes from a math standpoint around models and projections. And, these writers and these analysts have access to the best data in all of fantasy football to help do this analysis. There's data here that nobody else is getting except NFL teams. So that's pretty cool, man. It's a very select group of people that get to have this kind of access, and it's cool to be on that list, and I'm delighted to be part of that team.
You know what I think when I hear all those names, Dwain? Podcast guests. That's right.
We do need to. Yes.
So this is The Hustle. We appreciate you being here. Brian Drake, Dwain McFarland. You can also catch Dwain's utilization report over at establishtheRun.com. Evan Silva and the boys doing fantastic work there. I know their draft kit's available. So check it out. And if you want to check out a team that ran the rock like nobody's business, go over to Baltimore and see what Greg Roman was doing with Mark Ingram, Lamar Jackson, and the crew. Mark Ingram, current ADP, running back 21, 200 attempts last year, over 1,000 yards, 10 touchdowns. You go, wow, that's an okay year for a guy that led his team in rushing. He wasn't even the leading rusher on the team. The quarterback was. Averaged 16 points per game. Here's the problem. They can get out of his contract after this year for $1.2 million. It's probably going to happen. You know why? They drafted J.K. Dobbins, and he's really good. So in Mark Ingram's age 30 season, maybe they kind of push him out the door and get the young guy in there. You know what I found interesting, Dwain, about Ingram when I was looking through his stats and really what boosted him last year? 5 receiving touchdowns on only 21 receptions. That's incredible.
Yep. Yeah, everybody's worried about Lamar Jackson. They're so freaked out by what he can do. It's like these players are getting these looks that are just so easy. You know, if you go watch Mark Ingram's touchdown highlight reel, you'll see some of them. You're just like, wow, that was easy. Now, some of it is Mark Ingram. Mark Ingram's a very talented back and runs very hard, very determined for a 30-year-old, and still definitely has spark left. You'll see it. I mean, this guy runs with an attitude. He's fun to watch. But, you know, to your point, I mean, the issue here now, again, we're getting, you know, it's RB21. We're down in the RB2s right here. You know, you're into the almost the end of the 4th round. I've seen him honestly in drafts that cost more with sharper players. He doesn't go till the 5th round. I've seen him make it into the early 6th sometimes. Yeah. And so he's not a guy you're going to be able to count on, you know, every week. Are you going to get some big spikes out of Mark Ingram? Yeah. Is he going to be fun to watch? Yeah. When you get your spikes, is it going to be good? Yeah. But the Ravens have shown over the last couple of years, Drake, they're just willing to rotate players at almost every position, right? They keep their guys fresh. It's like you said, they go out and they add J.K. Dobbins. So, I mean, 37% of the team attempts is all that Mark Ingram had. I mean, so that tells you, I mean, how many times the Ravens freaking rushed the ball was insane. You know, and he did have huge efficiency, right? 5 yards per carry, but so did Gus Edwards. Gus Edwards, you know, hit the 5 yards per carry, you know, mark. Now, Ingram did his breakaways per attempt, 5.4%, which is really good. That's above the league average. 19% tackles avoided per attempt, Pro Football Focus, which is also really good. You know, so here's the problem with Mark Ingram. He's going to have to stay hyper efficient. And as good as the Ravens are, you could easily see some regression in these touchdown numbers, right? It could be very easy on the number of attempts he's got here to end up at 5 rushing touchdowns and 1 receiving. And then you don't feel so good about 1,000 yards rushing and 245 yards receiving, Drake. And that's going to be the problem. So we'll just break it down a little bit here for folks. We talked about the fantasy points again, so we don't really have to, you know, stick it out, you know, much there. But notice these games, you know, where they jump out. This is the opposite of what we've seen before. When the Ravens are working people over and don't have to throw, look, Mark Ingram, have a seat. These games where they're more competitive and they actually have to throw, they're keeping Ingram on the field more. Okay, so down here, again, right, the Ravens aren't having to drop back and pass. They're destroying people. 39-point victory. Mark Ingram, take a seat, bro. So he never has the upside of that 30, 40-point game, even when he's just on fire, right? Because they're going to let the next guy in. And now it could be even more because it's not a guy that's just a free agent off the street named, you know, Edwards. It's J.K. Dobbins. And so I think your point is legitimate. So this Ingram's the opposite of what we've seen of some of these other running backs that are game script dependent, right? Or what we've seen is the lead runner actually takes the back seat in these games where they pass more. It's the opposite. Ingram's the guy they want out there. They trust him. But the Ravens just aren't in that situation very often. And when they go to blow people out, they like to rotate people in. They're never just going to they're never just going to gas the whole thing with Ingram. They're saving him. So he barely, right, hits these thresholds for RB2, right? He's into the RB2 range, but you'll notice he never gets up here in this RB1 range. He's living, which he wasn't an RB1, last year. I mean, so he's an RB2. But you're just living dangerously, when you're on these numbers. Again, his draft price isn't terrible, so you don't have to worry about that as much. But look at his routes ran. He's down here below the RB2 threshold most weeks. And as to your point, 5 touchdowns when this is what's going on, that's some hyper efficiency. And I think we'll continue to see some efficiency with the Ravens offense because they've built something that the league's going to have to adapt to. But the league surprises us sometimes, Drake. Remember when everybody was like, oh my God, Sean McVay is the best offensive coordinator we've ever seen in our whole lives. He's got a photographic memory and he uses 11 personnel all the time. And he puts his wide receivers in these jet motions and it confuses everybody until it didn't anymore. And the league
I think that all the time with the Ravens. Like, why do we automatically assume that this kind of, I don't know, if you break it down, really, what is it, like a single wing almost? Like, why do we think this is going to keep going where people aren't going to figure out how to just stop running football?
I think some of it,
passing element.
Yeah, I think some of it is because this requires a further adaptation of an opponent's talent than what the Rams were doing. Most teams had the talent on their roster once they could figure out the Rams' tendencies on how that they could stop that type of offense because it was still 3 wide receivers on this field. Great. Now let's account for jet motion and wide zone and how they offset each other and stress the defense. And Bill Belichick basically took a lot. He took the cues from Matt Patricia in 2018, where Patricia and the Lions had shut down, the Rams attack. And after that, everybody started copying it later in the season. The Rams decline actually started right in the second half of 2018. Then they got some good matchups in the playoff, one against the CJ couldn't stop CJ Fatboy Anderson from going off for like 200 rushing yards because the Cowboys weren't built to stop, a heavy running back up the middle. They were built to play sideline to sideline against like an Alvin Kamara. Well, right. That's what the Ravens have here is they have a roster that's constructed to force teams that have built around nickel as their base and all of these third down type linebackers that can run everywhere. You got to have some bigger guys up front, right? To not just rush the passer, but to clog the running holes, to fill the running holes, to make the run fits. And it's problematic when you add a runner, like you said, that led the team was Lamar Jackson, and everything's based off of him. And the defense has to always account for him. And he's literally mismatched speed-wise against pretty much anybody. It's tough to put a spy on him. So there's that. I think the Ravens have a little more time left because they have so many elements in their favor. But there are some good, if you look at the Steelers are the team that played the Ravens. They played the Ravens really well last year. Now, one of the games was with RG3, the last game of the season, because the Ravens didn't need it. But go back and look at the game. I can't remember, it was week 9 or 10 or something. The Steelers shut the Ravens offense down. That game actually, I think, went to overtime. And so it was ended up being a really close game. So there are teams that can do it. There's just not many, right? But if you'll notice, look at what that division is doing and look at how those defenses are starting to adapt and people taking defensive tackles and different things like that. So it's just a matter of how quickly those teams can catch up. It can be stopped. It's a matter of it's not a light switch thing like I think some of it was with the Rams. So final take on Ingram here, Drake. I'm avoiding him at this price. He's priced, now, like I said, I'm seeing him draft fall to 5th and 6th round, which is that's much better. But if you got to take him this closely bunched together with the other backs we've just talked about, I'm out because, the chance of him getting 225 plus touches is just really low, and it's a pure efficiency bet, right, at his price that you're paying for. If we thought Mark Ingram had a chance of getting 250, 270, carries, we'd be all in all day. I mean, he'd be going in the second round of drafts, but he's just not likely to get that. He's going to be around 200, 225, and we could see it be even lower for the reasons you talked about. They drafted J.K. Dobbins, and many people, friends of our show, right, friend of the show, Matt Waldman, ranked J.K. Dobbins as one of the best backs he's graded in like 5 years. He loves the guy, says he's a stud. So positives, explosive offense, run heavy offense. So even though he's only getting 35, 40%, he could get to his 200 carries. The price is the ADP. We don't hate the player. We hate the ADP. It's just too much.
You've got him on PFF in your rankings, which you can go over to PFF and see right now, as running back 27 coming off the board. The guy we're going to talk about next, you have directly behind him in the standings.
Which right here is he's at 21. So, yeah, I'm quite a bit lower than consensus on Mark Ingram.
Okay, I got to get everybody open here. So the next guy you have on the list is Devin Singletary. He is a fascinating running back to talk about because in your home league and in Scott Fishbowl and different things I'm seeing best ball-wise, he seems to be going way earlier than I would want to take him. Now, as a rookie in Buffalo, he finished the year last year in half-point PPR as running back 31. Frank Gore was still there. He battled some injuries, so he didn't quite finish the season, only played 12 games, averaged 64.5 rushing yards per game. Extrapolate that out to 16 games, and you've got a little over 1,000 yards. Not bad. Here's the thing. He never gets the rock at the goal line. Only 3 rushes inside the 5. They were handing it off to Frank Gore. They've got the ultimate vulture and Josh Allen there. And now they go and they draft this kid, Zach Moss, in the 3rd round. So just when we thought, oh, Devin Singletary, you got your shot. There goes Frank Gore. Forget about it. Here comes Zach Moss. So in my mind, Dwayne, way too high of a price here at the 48th selection for a guy who may never score a touchdown.
Yeah, I think you're hitting it on the head. I mean, we could, I guess, just wrap this and not even show people any of the other slides. I think you hit it on the head with this guy, really. I mean, props to you. Because, folks, we didn't talk about this really before. Drake and I, I work on the slides with Corey, and then we hop on. But Drake does his studying ahead. So it's not just Dwayne giving you fantasy advice. It's Drake, too. He's nailed this one. Now, the thing that why Singletary is still interesting is because of this. His efficiency as a runner was really, really good. So he averaged 3 yards per carry after contact for being a small guy. Remember, I talked about earlier, over 2.5 is good. He was at a 3. 2.1 yards before contact per game. Now, that's not a sticky stat. When I say not a sticky stat, it's not something easy to translate year to year. Yards after contact is more of a sticky stat. Now, we've only got 1 year limited carries with 151 for Singletary, but those are very positive things. He didn't, for as much as he likes to juke and he likes to, the way he wins, right, is by, really, being elusive, right, against, the folks trying to tackle him. He's not just trying to run through people, but a lot of backs like that, their efficiency, which is a next generation stat from NFL.com, will shoot up. Like you'll see a Tariq Cohen, his efficiency will be up over a 4.5, which means he travels 4.5 yards to gain 1. Singletary's was a 3.5, which is still really good. So for being a guy that likes to win by being elusive, he's still decisive, which I like. 24% avoided tackles per carry rate. That's really good. You heard us talk about guys in the 19s and 17s earlier. Breakaway attempts, Drake, 9% of his carries go for over 10 yards. Wow. And they do some interesting things with Josh Allen, like what you see with Lamar Jackson, right, to stress defenses out, because Allen's not Lamar Jackson, but he's still a threat to run, and he's an athletic guy still at this age. Now, here's the unfortunate part, and so we'll hop on down. So efficiency-wise, those things look really great, and I was actually kind of down on Singletary last year, and I was just really didn't like him coming into the offseason. And before the draft, as I started researching all this, I was like, man, maybe I'm wrong on Devin Singletary. He could be like a LaShawn McCoy kind of guy, because those numbers I just gave you, that's the way LaShawn McCoy wins. And those guys typically can play a while in the league. They're not dependent on speed. They're more dependent on their elusiveness, which tends to go away not quite as quickly. And they don't take on as many big hits, right, which can keep them from getting injured and things like that. Now, they can blow out ACLs and things like that when you're making a jump cut, right, that goes 2 holes. So there's different things that can go on, as far as the risk you take on. But the issue, for Singletary, again, snaps. Once they made a switch, and we talked about this, if you listened to the Hustle last year, we look at this stuff on a week-by-week basis, and we try to give you preemptive indicators of guys that are earning more work that could soon be seeing more fantasy points, right? It's like what they've been doing in baseball for years. A guy's making hard contact on a baseball, 60% of the time, and he plays he plays on fields, or in stadiums with high dew points. Home runs are due to come, right? But the price may not reflect it, like in daily baseball, because the home runs haven't happened yet. So this is the same kind of stuff we're now trying to do in football. And we were talking about, Singletary early on saying, wow, look, like the snaps are jumping up. Frank Gore's are going down. And we started talking about this very early on. His routes per dropback come week 8, he just took it over. 72, 61, 57, 61, 69, 90, 65%. Of the time that Josh Allen was dropping back to pass, Singletary was out there. That's high leverage. That's great, right? So the issue was they never threw it to him. Josh Allen would just take off and run. And so what that reduces Singletary to, Drake, is a guy that they're going to leverage highly between the 20s, but they don't throw the ball to him very much. And when they get inside the 5, you already nailed it. Josh Allen gets the work, right? Or Zach Moss has been drafted to replace Frank Gore. So down here on these team inside the 5 rush percentages, week 1, 0, 0. He got 1 out of 3, 0, 0, 0. These blanks, they didn't have a carry inside the 5. It doesn't happen every week, right? Rushing attempts, again, staying down here below 40, 40, 55. He peaked up here, towards the end of the season. But notice, his RB1, he did get a few up here. And the Bills were able to play closer games last year than what they had the year before. So, that helped their running situation, and then he was in this RB2 range. But basically, once the time he took over, he was in this RB1, RB2 range from a rushing attempt standpoint. He just wasn't getting any of the work inside the 5 like you talked about. So the data really supports, what you've already said, Drake. I guess the positive thing, that you can say for a guy like Singletary, he's less likely just to be completely phased out, in a blowout. He's going to be the guy that's still going to get to be on the field. So his role isn't as likely to change as some other guys. The problem is he's losing high leverage snaps. So he's the positive young player was really, really strong running back efficiency data. Like for his first data point, like it's really good. If they hadn't drafted Zach Moss and it just brought in some old veteran, we would be looking at Singletary as a guy that we would be expecting them to allow to do more this year. But when they drafted Zach Moss and the type of player he is, he's a very hard-nosed, pound the rock kind of guy. He's going to run. He runs into contact, right? Doesn't always try to run away from contact. He can do both, but he's also a solid receiver out of the backfield. You got Josh Allen inside the 5-yard line. Allen doesn't check the ball down. So what does that leave you with? It leaves you a running back that's getting touches between the 20s. From a fantasy standpoint, the least valuable touches for running backs come between the 20s, and that's all he's getting. So he's in a void at his current ADP. If Zach Moss blows out a knee or something in preseason, we'll revisit this. But for now, pick 48 is just too much. He all he gets are low leverage touches.
He's really good Matt Breida. If you want to look at that, because you're just going to get your work from here to here in between the 20s and pray you break one deep. And that, as a Matt Breida owner last year, that's what I was so frustrated with him. Like, this guy's never going to score a touchdown. And
Drake, that's a perfect analogy. Like, you nailed it. Like, you could have done this segment, without me. I like to show off all the visuals since Corey worked on. But you could have done it without me, man. But no, that's a great. And he's likely to get some more long touchdowns this year. If his efficiency stays where it's at, I could see the guy getting 5 or 6. You're just never going to know when they're going to come.
I'll send you my resume. You can get it to the guys at PFF. Yeah, I won't charge him too much. All right, we're talking running backs here. It's the Fantasy Football Hustle. Brian Drake of FightingChanceFantasy.com. Check out FightingChanceFantasy.com because we've got a bunch of new writers. They're doing great things over there. Football, baseball, hockey. We had an article this week. We're going to see some NBA stuff coming. It's going to be great. Somebody who used to be great, and we're going to hope he gets back there, is David Johson. Now, he was traded, as you all know, because Bill O'Brien is a GM, I guess. I don't know. DeAndre Hopkins went to Arizona. David Johson, a former stud RB1, is on his way to the Houston Texans. Now, he's going off the board right around the start of the 6th round. RB38 last year. Excellent receiver, okay? Here's the thing. Last year in Houston, they had 79 running back targets. 62 of them went to Duke Johnson. Can he steal a piece of that pie? That's going to be the question for Dwain. And what does he have left in those legs? We've all seen the play where he looked really bad, and I don't know if that's truly indicative of who David Johson is, because early in the season, Dwain, he was still legit. I think he, in terms of fantasy points per game, he might have been like a top 5 guy until everything went sideways. So David Johnson's a unique guy. To me, he's very Todd Gurley like in terms of someone's going to get him in your league. They're going to kind of get him in the mid rounds. Everyone's going to be shying away like, I don't really want this guy. And then 6 weeks into the season, everyone's going to be trying to trade for him because he's putting up solid numbers in a good offense.
Yeah, and it's probably a trade that you'll want to take. I mean, so I think, when I'm lower than consensus on Johnson, we'll talk about that. I think out of the PFF rankers, I was the lowest or maybe second lowest on David Johnson. So, and David Johnson's a guy that I used to love. He's 28 and a half years old, though. He's battled, some injuries. He was a good player out of the gate last year. From an efficiency standpoint, I mean, it was solid, not great, but he was in a really good offense. The Cardinals, sneaky Cardinals. And again, Kenyon Drake love is way up there for me. I've got Kenyon Drake, go check out PFF rankings. If you're not subscribed. But I've got Kenyon Drake sky high. And a big part of it is this Cardinals, offensive line, what it can do. Yards before contact was second only to the Ravens. Again, not necessarily a sticky stat, but if you look at the way Kingsbury stretches fields out, he creates a lot of good situations for his running backs. Now you go to a team like Houston that does not create those type of opportunities for the running back. Bill O'Brien does not do the types of things that Cliff Kingsbury does. He plays a lot of 12 tight ends. He plays a lot of heavy formations, and he just wants his guys to win. Now, don't be wrong. You can do that. The Ravens do that, but they're built to do it. The Texans are not built to do it. And so David Johnson's entering a whole new world. He's a guy that's getting older. Efficiency is starting to slip. And now he's going to be playing on a team that's not going to give him the advantages that he saw early last year, with the Cardinals. And so what we're going to look at here is Carlos Hyde, and it's not an exact 1-to-1. I think David Johnson is still better than Carlos Hyde. So please, audience, don't take it that way. But I want to show you Hyde just because I want to talk, Hyde ended up being one of those guys last year that was real sneaky, right, Drake? He ended up getting, solid work every single week. It was never big from a fantasy standpoint, but the work was there. So real quickly, won't spend much time on this slide. Hyde popped up into the RB2 weeks, right? 3 different times, every other time down here. But snaps, this is where I expect David Johnson to be, up here in this range of what we're seeing with Hyde. So that's going to be good.
% for you guys listening on the podcast.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sorry, I got to say that. Yeah, he's going to be in the 60. Sorry, podcast folks. Still love you too. I'm getting the hang of doing this for YouTube and podcasting. But yeah, so he's in that RB2 range of snaps played, per game, which is good because that's where you're taking him. But the rushing attempts, are what was really great, for Carlos Hyde. So if you look at it last year, RB1 rushing attempts average are 17 per week. Hyde topped that, Drake, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times, and he hit it on a 7th. So 7 times Carlos Hyde was at an RB1 workload as far as rushing attempts go. Of all the rest of the times on the season, he had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 games where he didn't hit the RB2 threshold. So most weeks, that's the positive for David Johnson. I think David Johnson clearly takes over the role that Carlos Hyde had, and I do believe that David Johnson is a little bit better than Carlos Hyde. So now let's talk about, the inside the 5 rushing attempts. The other thing is Carlos Hyde got all of that work as well. Inside the 5, he had over 60% of the carries. Deshaun Watson did get a little bit of those, but from inside the 5, here are the percentages for Hyde on the weeks: 50%, 100%, 50, 100, 50, 50, 100, 100. He had a couple of zeros mixed in there. Again, Watson can be a threat, at any time, and then sometimes Duke Johnson steals a little bit of that. But I think what you're going to look at with David Johnson, you're going to have a running back that's going to get over 60% of the attempts straight, and I think he's going to get over 60% of the attempts inside the 5. So that's good because we've talked about other backs going before him, right, that that may not even necessarily get that, or they're getting something similar. The problem is, will David Johnson get what we used to think? We used to think of David Johnson, right, as really this elite receiving back, this elite receiving option. He was really the Christian McCaffrey kind of before Christian McCaffrey. If you go back 5-6 years ago, last year Carlos Hyde obviously didn't get any of that work. This is really almost irrelevant looking at this slide because everybody here knows Carlos Hyde is not a good receiver. He's just not. He's not a good receiver. Teams have tried to give him a chance at it, and he's done okay here and there, but he just hasn't been consistent. But here's my problem around Duke Johnson, Drake. Around David Johnson. It's Duke Johnson. Duke Johnson was traded for as well the year before. And they traded for him to specifically be, right, the guy that's getting the work as the receiving back. And we're talking about, a coach in Bill O'Brien that's really fine mixing this all up. So while the positive is Houston made a crazy trade to secure David Johson, right? You get rid of DeAndre Hopkins, dumb.
Yeah.
He does have 3-down ability. The offense is solid, not great. It's not going to create the mismatches he saw in Arizona. But they have Duke Johnson, who they traded a 3rd-round pick for, and Deshaun Watson's a threat inside, the 5. So for me, this is one of those deals where it's like I want to give David Johnson more of the passing work, and I think he could get a little more than what we saw with Carlos Hyde. But I think David Johnson being on the roster and being such a good receiver out of the backfield and probably better than Duke Johnson, right? I mean, David Johnson is not as good as Duke Johnson at this point in his career as a receiver, out of the backfield. And so when I look at last year and I look at, the utilization of Duke Johnson, God, this is ridiculous having these two guys on the same team of Duke Johnson, right? If you look at his routes per dropback last year, Drake, 53%, 46%, 56%, 60%. It goes on and on and on. 90, 75, 72, 57, 56. He averaged 54% of the routes per dropback last year. Duke Johnson did. I don't see David Johnson getting much higher than the 35%, that Carlos Hyde saw last year. He might get to 40, but I think that, he's going to jump to 50 or 60. I just don't think so because again, while they did trade, for David Johnson, they traded for Duke Johnson last year and he's really good at that. Now, what I'll say is the price of 51 is not bad. He's going after the other guys that have similar roles. So you could look at it that way. But what I would tell the audience, is he's definitely not a guy that I'm reaching for, and I'm not building plans around David Johnson.
No, not at all. I think we're going to see that with a couple of guys that we're going to talk about for the rest of the show here. And we hope you guys are digging it. We're talking running backs here that you might be taking in the 3rd, 4th, 5th, maybe even sliding into the 6th round. It depends how you build your team. If you take a couple of good receivers early, you take that tight end. Who knows? Maybe even get crazy. You take a quarterback early. These are guys you're going to have your eye on. We want you to have the information because the information is ammo in your draft. Shoot down the bad players. Go and get the players who are going to be high upside and get those money touches inside the 5 and be catching the rock. A guy who wasn't catching the rock last year was David Montgomery from the Bears. ADP of running back 25 going off the board as the 57th overall player. His rookie campaign, if you look at it on the surface, you go, wow, he almost ran for 1,000 yards, 6 rushing touchdowns, still had 35 targets, only 1 receiving touchdown. Then you look at the 11 points per game on average. That's not great. That's not going to win you fantasy championships. It's a bad O-line. He's not very elusive. Although they didn't do anything to add anyone to this backfield. It's him, it's Tariq Cohen, and then they went out and added Nick Foles, who we believe is going to be the quarterback. I don't know. I've got a draft pick in Scott Fishbowl coming up soon where I may be taking one of these Bears quarterbacks because they're all gone. But if David Montgomery's not adding things in the passing game, Dwayne, do I have room on my roster for a guy who's going to score me 11 points a game? In a PPR, like I feel like I can find more value somewhere else, or am I missing the point here? Is there more to be done with Mr. Montgomery, especially if Nick Foles is there and he's playing out of a lot of shotgun because that's where Nick Foles is best?
Yeah, David Montgomery.
You love David. I'm sending you a David Johnson jersey.
You are. David Johnson, Duke Johnson, and David Montgomery all back to back. But David Montgomery, here is. For me, he's the opposite, right, of what we've seen, with some of the other runners, that we've talked about from an efficiency standpoint. We talked about Devin Singletary, who's definitely going, too high, but his efficiency was really intriguing. David Montgomery actually had the workload last year, but his efficiency was terrible. He ranked out of the runners, Drake, with at least 100 attempts or more. He was 44 out of 50. With a grade of 64.1. So this is a guy that, and when I say grade of 64.1, that's his rushing grade from Pro Football Focus. So he was really bad. His tackles avoided per attempt, 19%, really great. But he never goes forward, only a 2% breakaway average, okay? His average yards, his average yards after contact are okay. Played 57% of the snaps. 65% plus guy, again, you're getting in round, here I see him going round 5, round 6, and he is still young. So, I mean, those are the positive things. He's just got to be more efficient. So if we look at, what he had from a standpoint, last year, the points, everybody knows, right? It was, he basically had to have some big plays, to be able to do anything for you. But if we look at his snaps, he's in the range of where you would want to be. Okay. He does have some of these games where he drops down. Well, look at it. Why? When they're dropping back to pass 70, 89% of the time because they're losing, who's on the field? Tariq Cohen. So as much as we like David Johson, and he actually is a decent receiver, Tariq Cohen is kind of a dip, and Tariq Cohen had a bad year last year as well. But Tariq Cohen is a guy that they want to have on the field in those situations. So notice every time, Drake, 69, 89% of team the dropbacks, 69%, 89%. Snaps go down to 54 or 47%. In week 11, 12, 13, 69%. We drop down to 46%. Notice these 2 weeks here where they're dropping back to pass more, but he stays on the field. Notice these are games where they actually won. So they weren't getting blown out. So you're really looking at 2 factors here. How often are they dropping back? And, by what, how many points are they losing? Week 15 is another great example. They had to drop back to pass 71% of the time. They lost the game by 8. David Montgomery was only on the field for 43% of the snaps. So when you're an inefficient player, and then you're going to have weeks where you may only be on the field for 40, 45% of the snaps, that can create some really bad fantasy output when we come back up here to the screen above. Week 10, 11, 12, 6 points, 6 points, 5 points, 4 points, 5.5 points, 5.9. I mean, he had a lot of terrible weeks straight.
It's a bad team that's behind a lot, and he doesn't catch passes. Yeah, that's the book on David Montgomery.
Yeah, the positive, though, is they do have a defense that was really good the year before. So they could be better again. Their offense put them in some terrible situations last year with turnovers, bad field position. And so if Nick Foles, to your point, can come in and just stabilize things and just drive the bus. I hate using that term, but if he could just come in and drive the bus, it could potentially help a guy like David Johson, stay on the field. I mean, David Montgomery stay on the field more, right? Yeah, I'm just going to say David Johson about everybody from moving here forward. Sorry. But so if we look at his rushing attempts, this is a positive, right? He topped, the RB1, threshold of attempts 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times, which, is 17 carries or more. So he had an 18 carry week, a 21, a 27. But again, notice where those weeks, they coincide with a win. 21 carries in a week where they win by 10 points and only drop back to pass 52%. 27 carries in a week where they lose the game by 1, only drop back to pass 54% of the time. 20 carries in a week they win by 7 points, only drop back to pass 55%. So you need things to go right for Montgomery to get, his carries. And people are used to hearing game script dependent. He's double game script dependent. If they start to drop back too much, Cohen gets on the field. If they start to trail by too much, Cohen gets on the field. If they do both things, David Montgomery essentially turns into useless. And I don't really expect that to change this year because I think Cohen is still going to be in his role. So if we look at Montgomery's routes ran per game last year, he was below the RB2 threshold 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 games out of the 16. And he got up into the RB2 threshold 6 times. He was never over the RB1. From a target standpoint, he got to the threshold of an RB2 or an RB1 3 times. Every other week he was below an RB2. So the positive here, and I didn't mention it before, Drake, is from a standpoint of the carries inside the 5. He does get those. He was last year inside the 5, 86% of the team rushing attempts. So that's a positive. I saw him do it
in person at the Link against the Eagles. I think he punched in 2 of them.
Yeah. So I mean, here's the thing on the David Montgomery front. If
you got it,
yes. If I got it, yeah. If the Bears can play better defense, Nick Foles can stabilize the offense. I do think that there's an opportunity, for this guy, to improve his efficiency. And we know he's going to get the work inside the end zone. So if you think about his profile as a runner, it's really the exact same. If you get rid of the other context, right, of, the defense and the offense has to be better. But if we look at a guy that's going to get likely 65% of the carries, not going to be used as much in the passing game, even though we know he can do it, and he's probably going to get over 65% of the work inside the 5, That's the same exact profile from a utilization perspective as Josh Jacobs, as Nick Chubb, as Joe Mixon, and what he did last year, and Derrick Henry. So there could be an argument that's easy to be made, right? If you can get this player at pick 57 and either A, he just gets better, becomes more efficient, and does more with his touches, B, the offense gets slightly better, or C, the defense returns to form. Any one of those could give you more value for David Montgomery. If all three happen, there's a path where David Montgomery could surprise us, and next year we're all talking about him as being an RB2. And what I like is he's the cheapest of all these guys. And I didn't expect to be saying this, Drake, because when you look at his efficiency and stuff, it's bad. But I have to remember and remind myself, I learned lessons. When I look back to Le'Veon Bell's first year in the league, nobody wanted him, Drake. What did he average, like 3.6 yards per carry or something? His metrics all looked bad. I just thought, oh, he looks slow. He avoids tackles, but he can't break a big one. And so I reminded myself that with David Montgomery, when I was really thinking through this. Now, I have David Montgomery ranked pretty low, but when I think of what his floor is and what his ceiling is, I think he has a ceiling that could creep up towards a top 12 runner based on what we have here. The problem is he needs multiple things to go right. We already know that the Browns and we already know that the Raiders have good offensive lines. We don't know how good the Bears' offensive line is going to be. We already know that we're expecting those offenses to be better. We don't know they're going to be better, but we feel pretty good about at least the Browns for sure. For the Bears, we still have big question marks. So there's more question marks tied to how efficient he can be. But if we're just talking utilization profile, David Montgomery is a guy that I didn't think would be on any of my teams, but he's probably going to end up on some of them. Even though I do have him ranked, lower, I do realize, what his potential upside is.
He's a guy that's a favorite of a lot of zero RB builds. People are kind of digging him because they know they can get him after they take 3 or 4 wide receivers to start their draft.
I mean, I've got him graded ahead of Mark Ingram, ahead of Devin Singletary. I've seen Kareem Hunt get drafted in front of him. I would never do that. I've seen J.K. Dobbins get drafted ahead of David Montgomery. I see Raheem Mostert get drafted ahead of David Montgomery. That's right in the range I have him in. With the rookie runners of Cam Akers, DeAndre Swift, Raheem Mostert, that's kind of the tier I've got him in. I've got him just below, David Johson. But when I get this discount of another, 6 picks potentially, and plus, I don't see David Johson go that late. David Johnson's usually gone in the 4th round, in the drafts that I'm at. But David Montgomery is a guy that I do see fall. And so he's a guy that I think I will own, some more. The biggest issue you have with him is he's got a hard cap on his receiving upside. Don't expect more out of his receiving, but it's priced in. It's priced in to, how late you get him.
Absolutely. The Fantasy Football Hustle, Brian Drake, Dwain McFarland, talking about running backs here. It's a running back bonanza. If you want to get into some running backs that might go in the 1st, 2nd round, you're going to want to head over into the archives, either on YouTube or on iTunes, wherever you get your podcasts, and check out the show we did a week ago. And that was really good. And tons of great content. Thanks to all the folks who downloaded the shows on YouTube. We're going to break these guys up individually. We still have a few more guys to talk about, one of them being someone who just requested a trade this week. And that's Raheem Mostert, coming off the board at running back 26. And a lot of people are way into Mostert, okay? He had 8 touchdowns in his final 9 games last year, put up numbers 772 and 8 on the ground, finished the season in a half-point PPR at running back 24. Breeda's gone.
Who does this smell like, Drake? Who does this smell like? This smells like Damian Williams. Now, granted, the price, the price is much better here.
I loved Damian Williams last year when you and I were doing shows. I'm not on Mostert. I tweeted this week, follow me at Drake Fantasy, I tweeted that he has 0 leverage in a trade because, number one, he's just a guy. He's been on 8 different teams.
He's 28 years old.
Yes, but he's in that Shanahan offense. Anybody can get plugged into that role if you have any kind of skill and you're going to produce. And guess what? Maybe it's Jermichael Hasty, who they got as a UDFA, or, Jerick McKinnon, who they're paying a boatload of dough to. Someone's going to take this role. If Tevin
Coleman can run with this offense.
Yeah.
And I don't even like Tevin Coleman, but he can be fine.
This is all about the Shanahan scheme here, but Mostert kind of was the last man standing and put up some really good numbers at the end of the year and into the playoffs. But all right, so we're looking here ahead, though. We're not looking behind us. Let's look at 2020. Let's assume he's on the San Francisco 49ers, and you're sitting there in the start of the 5th round. You need a running back. Raheem Mostert's there. Are you pulling the trigger on him, Dwayne?
I think it depends on roster construction, Drake, really. I mean, it comes down to if you want the upside, you're kind of funny, right? Because if you liked Damian Williams last year in the 2nd, you should actually like Raheem Mostert in the 5th or 6th.
I know. I don't know why I'm not into it.
Because it's priced in. Because the upside is the same, right? If for some reason Shanahan moves away from hot hand approach, which it's funny. People, you go grab, those last few weeks, and you do see the upside of Mostert, but there are still issues, and Shanahan's still willing, to ride, another back. So if at the end of the season, week 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, you got 3 weeks, right, where he almost gets to RB1. But let's talk a little bit, about the challenges with Mostert. Even in those weeks where he was doing well, he was still at or right below the RB2 threshold from a snap percentage. He was still sharing with Tevin Coleman. And before that, Tevin Coleman had been the guy, and Mostert was the guy coming in and just getting a little bit of work along with Breida. And then in the playoffs, we even had a game where Tevin Coleman did that again and became the lead runner. So people, just seem to forget some of those things. And the other problem here is it was, again, hyper efficiency. So even in those weeks, Drake, where he hit those fantasy points, look at his carries, weeks 13, 14, 15, 16, and 17. He topped the RB1 mark one time with 19. The 3 of the other 4 weeks, he didn't even get to the RB2 mark, which is only 12 carries. He had 3 weeks at 10, 11, and 10. Mm-hmm. And then in week 15, he got just above the RB2 threshold.
He's helped a lot with those touchdowns.
Yeah, with 14 attempts. So this is a guy that wasn't even getting all the attempts inside the 5 either. He's breaking long runs. In those same weeks, Drake, week 13, the 49ers didn't have a carry inside the 5. Week 14, they did. He didn't get any of that work. Week 15, he got 1/3 of the carries. He got 1 carry inside the 5. Week 16, the Niners didn't have a carry inside the 5. And in week 17, he got all the work when the Niners had pretty much everything wrapped up, and they just let Mostert go out there and run. So when I look at Mostert, man, it just feels way, way, way more shaky than what most people, are thinking. Now, having said that, that it is showing in his ADP, but from a standpoint of running routes, he's also barely touching RB2. He's below RB3 every one of these weeks. So the guy had some RB1 or solid, really good RB2 production, really borderline RB1 production down the stretch, but he didn't get the carries he needed. He didn't get the routes ran he needed. He didn't get the carries inside the 5. I don't know what else to say to folks other than this guy is very, very much due for regression. He could very easily be replaced on a hot hand approach. Now, what I'll say is if you're just wanting to swing for the fences, right? Let's say you're going contrarian and you start off and you draft 3 receivers and a tight end. You go receiver, tight end, receiver, receiver, because your thought process is some of these receivers everybody thinks is going to be good because we've had years like this before, and around 6, 7, 5, 8 aren't going to be that good. And so you think, I'm going to just draft the receivers I love, and I'm going to get an elite tight end. And you want to mix Mostert in, to your strategy as an RB, as your RB2 or RB1, or you're just going to draft 5 running backs after that, right? You're just going to go runner, 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 runner. Fine. Put Mostert in the mix. I think, making the bet on him, that this is going to happen, I think is a bit silly. Literally nothing about his utilization metrics say this guy can be an RB1. He's living on more efficiency almost than what Mark Ingram was. Mark Ingram at least was hitting some of the thresholds you need, and because they're similar, right? 2 guys in really good offenses that have high efficiency, but Ingram was at least hitting the thresholds you want from a temp standpoint to get into that RB2 range most weeks. He was hitting he had several games where he was getting some of the routes ran, when the Ravens were in closer games. Yeah, they weren't great, but Mostert's nowhere close to any of that. He had 1 week where he hit some of the marks you want. So the ADP is not crazy if you can get him in, the 60s, you get him in the 70s sometimes, and you're just swinging for the upside. So that's the way I think of it. If you're going something contrarian and you're swinging for the fences, great. But here's what I would rather do, Drake. Just wait and draft Tevin Coleman in the 9th or 10th round. They're probably going to be much closer than what people think. And the number of attempts, the percentage of, routes ran, Coleman's going to beat him. Coleman's going to get more work in that facet of the game. And Coleman could easily pass him to be the lead, candidate to get the most carries again, right? And injuries happen, all sorts of stuff. So, and like you said, some third guy we've never heard of by week 7 will be the guy that the 49ers are using. So,
like
Raheem
Mostert, who nobody was talking about a year ago.
Yeah, Sigmund Bloom. I do give him credit. He was talking about him in the preseason, and I thought, "Oh, Sigmund, you're just being wild-eyed," But he was right. So for Mostert, that's the way I look at it. In certain roster constructions where you're going to build your roster with receivers and tight ends early, just to be different, and you're going to come back and follow that up and take like 4 runners later, which I don't really recommend doing that often. It's nice to do it some, just because there is more value, like we've talked about at receiver, but we could be wrong on this stuff. So there is logic in playing a contrarian style of going 0 RB this year. And if it hits, you're going to be one of the few people in these big tournaments that actually used it, because most people won't have done that. And so in that kind of play, that's where I would say Mostert could provide some value as one of like 5 runners you take when you just start swinging in round 5. All of a sudden you go Montgomery, Mostert. We'll talk about a few other guys later, but say you grab Kareem Hunt with upside, and you're just piling up guys, right? In that case, then I think fine, take Mostert.
To use a baseball analogy, he is that guy who hits 200 and then goes on a hot streak in July and hits 10 home runs, and everyone goes, "Oh yeah, remember the great season he had?" You go, "Well, yeah, the guy hit 205, but then he hit 15 home runs in the last month of the season, and now everybody thinks he's great," versus a guy like Aaron Judge who's hitting 300 all season long. A guy who had quite the break and then came back and was hitting like Aaron Judge was Kareem Hunt. And he had that 8-game suspension, still came back to the Browns and just totally decimated the receiving work from Nick Chubb. In only 8 games, he caught 37 passes for 285 and a touchdown. That's 4.6 catches per game. That's awesome. Like, if Nick Chubb could have had that work and Kareem Hunt wasn't there, we'd be talking about Nick Chubb as a top 5 draft pick right now. He only had 44 rushes on the whole season, still got 2 touchdowns because Nick Chubb's, inside the 5-yard line. I want to run my head into a wall. He can't find his way into the end zone. But here's a guy, mid to late rounds, people are going to be taking shots on. Imagine if Nick Chubb goes down. Oh, my Lord, Kareem Hunt is, the savior, come back to earth. But what are your thoughts, Dwayne, here on Kareem Hunt? 43 attempts, you see there, 179 rushing yards. In Stefanski's offense, is he going to be on the field enough to get more attempts, or are we going to see that fullback on the field? Where's Hunt fall here on the Cleveland Browns?
Yeah, I don't expect to see a lot of, 2 RB sets with Hunt and with Chubb. And here's why. And now if David Njoku gets traded like he wants, I think there's some potential to get Kareem Hunt, more involved. But I just don't – if that doesn't happen, you're going to see a lot of 12 personnel. You're going to see a lot of 21 personnel, which will mostly be with Andy Janovich, who they picked up in the offseason. So Stefanski wants to run Gary Kubiak's offense. You know what team ran the least 11 personnel in the whole league last year?
The least 11? Philadelphia.
No.
Cleveland?
Nope. Your Vikings. Where does Kevin Stefanski come from? The Vikings. Right? And this is the offense he's going to be running. So even if you hear a lot of, Kareem Hunt's going to get in the slot. Oh, okay. Yeah. If the Browns are getting blown out and they need to go to 11, they don't really have a great third receiver. So I could see Hunt doing well there. If you look at Hunt's grades as a receiver when lined up in positions besides a runner, so, playing, in the slot or playing outside at receiver, his grades are actually really good. And he's an elite player. So he could do that. The problem is you're not going to get out of your sets that Stefanski loves as far as what he thinks brings efficiency to his offense. He loves the 12 personnel look. So he really wants to keep David Njoku, and he brought in Austin Hooper for them to work together, not to just have one and lose the other. So I see the Browns really trying to keep Njoku. And if they do that, I think it's going to make Kareem Hunt it's going to make him the change of pace back to Nick Chubb. Last year, if you look at, Kareem Hunt, he carved out 21% of the attempts in the last 8 games where he was active. Last year, Kevin Stefanski used Alexander Mattison 22% of the time as far as attempts go when Dalvin Cook was healthy. So I think Kareem Hunt could carve out a little bit more than that, Drake. I think he could get up into like that 25% range. But the problem is, I mean, he's playing behind Nick Chubb, who's one of the best young runners in the NFL. The dude is elite. I mean, we're talking about a guy that's up. I mean, he's graded out from a rushing perspective better than Derrick Henry each of the last 2 years. From Pro Football Focus, 2 of the highest graded back-to-back seasons as a rusher that Pro Football Focus has had in the history of their grading. I mean, so Nick Chubb is just an elite player. And despite Kareem Hunt also being an elite player, I think he's just stuck in a little bit of a bad situation here, right? It would be great if Kareem Hunt was, on another team. Here's my other problem with Kareem Hunt. I never see him go at this ADP. This guy goes in the 5th and 4th rounds of a lot of drafts I'm in. It's just too rich for me. Yeah. If he goes at 78, I'd be much more willing at this ADP, because now I'm getting to a point where I might be able to use him in bye weeks for another player. And I've got the upside that if Chubb goes down, I got a league winner. And I'm not doubting that. If Chubb goes down, Kareem Hunt can be a league winner. But people drafting him in the 4th and 5th round, you need to be getting points on a weekly basis out of somebody. And I don't think you're going to get enough points from Kareem Hunt, on a week-to-week basis to really warrant, taking him that high. If we look at his points last year, again, completely different offense. But, I mean, he got up over the RB2 3-4 weeks, right? And he's probably not going to see near as much passing work in the Stefanski offenses, because what you're going to see is they're going to try to run the ball more, which means he needs to take carries away from Chubb, which is going to be hard. So even if he gets work, as a slot receiver, et cetera, I think the problem here for Kareem Hunt is the offensive pie as a whole. They're going to pass the ball less. Now, when he's on the field in running situations, he's going to have good efficiency. He's going to have some big plays. I just worry that you got to live week to week on those plays, Drake. Yeah, and a lot of people talk about, Chubb last year in the last 2 weeks. Man, Chubb was down under 10 points. Well, so was Kareem Hunt in week 16 and week 17. He had 7.3 and 6.6 points, even though that's the old offense. But his snaps, last year, he was in that RB2, RB3 range. So, they do try to get him. They were trying to get him on the field. I don't think he's going to be able to get on the field that much in the Stefanski offense, because last year they were using him more creatively and splitting him out wide and doing a lot of those other different things. I don't think you're going to see as much in Stefanski's offense because of the personnel groupings, that he uses. From a standpoint of rushing attempts, obviously people know I don't need to spend time here. He didn't get the work. He doesn't get the work inside the 5. I expect that to continue to mostly be Chubb. I think he'll still a rushing touchdown here or there, probably from inside the 5, because he is a really good player. Last year, where he was adding the value, Drake, is he was up over that RB1 threshold many weeks, or right at it, in routes ran. Exactly. And I don't know that I see that happening. While I love this offense and I'm excited about what the Browns are doing, that's not, really. Now, Stefanski could surprise us and do that, and he is a creative coach, So, I mean, it'd be cool if he figured out a way. The problem is, if you put the two of them out there together, Hunt isn't a great blocker. You'd rather have Andy Janovich, right? Mm-hmm. And so, if you put him out there, it's almost like we're throwing the ball. It's almost like a tell in a way, right? Okay, great. You really want Chubb blocking? He's not going to be a great blocker too. He's a halfback. As far as, getting him on the field outside of when you go to a slot receiver, you're not pulling Jarvis Landry or Odell Beckham Jr. off the field for this guy. That's 2 really freaking good receivers. So yeah. I struggle with it, Drake. Now, here's the scenario I could see Hunt surprising us all. The Browns just come out and suck. They're getting blown out, and they got to throw the ball all the time. Then all of a sudden, Kareem Hunt becomes very valuable, because I do believe he's the 2-minute back. I believe he's going to be, anytime they're in an obvious passing down, like 3rd and 8, he's going to be the guy on the field. He's going to be the PPR guy. So he's really more akin to, think about some of the other guys that we target, like James White, Tariq Cohen. He's really more in that kind of a role, but he does have the upside that if Chubb goes down, he's a league winner, where those guys are not. So he deserves a place in the 7th and 8th round. But if you've got to take him in the 5th round, I think it's just too soon.
And Cleveland, if they're a bad team because they're in a brutal division, you could absolutely see him being traded at the deadline, because they probably won't bring him back next year. So, who knows? You could have him on your roster, and then all of a sudden he gets traded to, Miami or someplace. And then the last 5 weeks of the season, he's killing it. But, who knows? That's speculation. But final take on Kareem Hunt.
Yeah, he's an elite talent. We love the player. It's just, again, ADP of 78 is tolerable, but where I'm seeing him go, it's just hyper aggressive, man. It is hyper aggressive. I like the idea of the upside, league winner and a guy that can give me some PPR on bye weeks. If I can get him at the price of 78, but man, it's just not worth it for me in the 5th round with the receivers that are there, or even some of the other runners. It's just really tough for me. So love the scheme, love his talent. If Chubb goes down, he will win someone a league. No doubt. I'm not doubting that at all. He's but he's playing behind a really good runner, and I mean, the other thing is I just don't see him getting as many looks outside and in the slot and things like that as he did last year, because we're going to see heavy 12 and heavy 21 personnel if this thing's going well. The thing that gets Hunt on the field more is if this team's getting killed. And even then, his upside he's going to give you as a receiver isn't going to offset that. Really what this team is going to be, Stefanski's scheme is built to put defenses in really bad situations because everything looks the same, right? Is this a pass or is this a run? Oh crap, it's a play action. And then there goes, Austin Hooper or Odell Beckham Jr. Oh crap, I'm trying to account for these tight ends. And then here goes Kareem Hunt, for 70 yards. I think he's going to get some of those plays, but I don't think he's going to get 40 or 50% of carries, which is what you need to think to be taking him where he's going. I think he's still going to be in that 25% range. He's probably going to get 8 to 10% of the targets, which is solid. But again, the price is just too high unless he actually falls to the ADP we're seeing here.
We hope you guys enjoyed all this running back talk. We really enjoy bringing it to you in this new format. If you're listening on iTunes or whatever podcast platform you have, please give us a rating and review there, and share the podcast on Twitter or Facebook. Kind of spread the love there. We appreciate it. If you're watching this on YouTube, click that subscribe button. We appreciate that a ton. And follow us on Twitter. I'm at Drake Fantasy. He is at Dwain McFarland, DWAIN McFarland. Thanks so much again, Corey Hypus, 5 Yard Lee. You guys are really our guys. We can't thank you enough for the work you do on the hustle. And without you guys, we wouldn't be able to bring the great quality product that we do every single week. So also head over to fightingchancefantasy.com, read some of the stuff there. Go to PFF. Subscribe, check out Dwain's rankings over there. You're always asking folks, where do we get Dwain's rankings? Right now, they're at pff.com. And the great work at ETR, Establish the Run. Their draft kit is live, and Evan Silva's tiers and all that are up. I was reading them earlier today. It's really fantastic content. So anything else before we get out of here, Dwain?
Nope. This week I'll be putting out my RB tiers at Pro Football Focus. So look forward to seeing that.
Look at that. I like it. So for Dwain McFarland, I am Brian Drake. We'll see you guys next week. And remember, folks, don't even think about getting out hustled. Not once, not twice, never get out hustled. Take care, folks. Appreciate you listening.